One of the first software development life cycles ever created was the waterfall model. This methodology, even though it's one of the oldest and it's considered the traditional model, it definitely still is in use today. I'll give you more details about what it is, what it does, the pros and cons, and what the best scenarios are to utilize. So first off, all about linear progression. You're working from one phase into the next phase, into the next phase, into the next phase. And you do not go on to, go from your phase 1 to phase 2 until that phase 1 is complete. So each particular phase or stage begins with the previous stage's input. So let's kind of work through this a little bit. The first stage or phase is the requirements phase. So we'll break these down a little bit further on the next slide, but I want to give it to you at a high level and give you an overall understanding of what the waterfall model means. So after the requirements stage, you move into the design stage. So the requirements have some type of requirements document that is output of requirements, and it's given to design. Once the design stage is in full effect, the output of design is a design document, and that's pushed out to development. So then the coding, the development's done, and the end result of that is the software that's pushed into testing. The testing is worked through and is done. That's pushed into deployment, and after the deployment has been completed, that goes into the phase of maintenance. So as you can see here, the waterfall model has its name because it trickles down. The water starts at requirements and flows over the edge of that stage as it completes onto design, and it goes all the way down through the waterfall. And one of the pieces to this is water cannot go back up. So there's no way in the waterfall model to go from requirements to design and then back up to requirements. Can you do it? Sure, you can, but really what you're doing is you're not just, let's go back up to requirements quick and redo some of this. It's, we need to pull the whole project back up a phase, right? We need to rewind and go back a stage before we can move on, which can really make projects go long. One kind of nice thing about it is it's a fully planned model. So as you start a project, you know what those phases are going to look like. And you can put a pretty good project plan together to look at the time schedule as well as a budget for what that project is going to take. You know that when you get down with the requirements, you're moving to design, to development, and you're only going to run through the full process once. So it makes it a little bit easier to fully plan out. As well as in the waterfall model, since you move from requirements to design to development, you have much more extensive documentation. So you have great documentation that's utilized and that it comes out of this model. And one other piece with that is there's a formal approval process. So as you get done with requirements, before you go into design, there's a formal requirements approval by the business users or the stakeholders and the project sponsor. Once we get into design, once it's through design, there's a formal approval. So you use them as toll gates or stage gates, if you will, that you can't move on to that next stage or that next phase until it's been approved. So that's definitely very, very helpful. Now let's go into and really dissect all the different stages and understand fully what we're doing in those particular stages. So we'll start with the requirements phase. The first thing is business needs analysis. So as a business analyst, you're diving in to understand what are the business needs, and then you want to elicit and document their requirements. So understand what their need is, document the requirements of what their solution needs to incorporate or have accounted for. Once you've got all that completed, and that's a very long pull phase, going through that piece and getting everything documented, you move into the design phase. And this is where you design the solution that will meet those requirements. Using the requirements as the input, you design a solution that will meet it. You also are determining hardware and system requirements in this phase, And then you're splitting the design into segments or pieces. And that way it'll be easier when you work through your development. So let's go. We've got to, taking a step back, we've got a design document. We get that approved and we move into the development phase. The development phase is really where we develop and we code each segment based on the design. So we take each of those pieces, we break it up, and now we're coding on them. And then the developers are working through their unit testing and ensuring that everything's meeting the requirements, meeting that design that they were given, and that there aren't any bugs in their code. Once that's complete, we move into an official testing phase. This is where the system is tested through each segment that was built, each piece that was broken off. And this is done by either a quality assurance analyst or it could be the business analyst or both that are working through this piece and working through this testing. The next phase of testing, so we're still in the testing phase, but kind of a next step there is user acceptance testing. So this is having the business work through each of those segments and ensure they're validating and verifying that their needs are met based on the requirements that were gathered earlier. And then the last piece to testing is the end-to-end test. So you've been testing the software in its segments, in each piece as that was available. Now you need to take all those pieces and put them together, all the data integration, all the different inputs and outputs, and test the system from start to finish through the process and make sure that it doesn't have any bugs or any slip-ups as you work and as each segment is tied together. Once you're done with the testing stage, you usually have a testing document that's approved. As you've worked through testing, all your test cases are approved in green and the business gives you the thumbs up. You move into deployment. So this could be one of two things. One, you're deploying your custom software, your configured software into a production environment. So this would be where the software is something that your business will be utilizing. Generally, in the business analyst world, for the most part, this is probably what you're going to be doing, unless you're working with a company that delivers products or is a startup company for products. But the other piece is you could, instead of delivering to your business users, you could be releasing it to the market. So if this is a product that you're going to be selling out in the market to other businesses and companies, that could be that stage or that piece within the deployment. Once it's deployed, you move into the maintenance phase. And this is the last phase of the waterfall model. You're working through and you're fixing bugs with different patches and releases. So things that were found that were missed throughout the different phases, you're working through and fixing that. And you're also looking to enhance the product to meet the ever-changing business needs. So the business doesn't stop once the business doesn't say, oh yeah, this is perfect, this meets our needs, and will meet all of our future needs. No, absolutely not. They're saying that this is meeting our needs right now, but as the business change, they need the software to be maintained and new features and functionality added to keep up to speed with those changing needs. So let's look through some of the pros and the cons to the waterfall model. So starting out with the pros at the top of the slide. One really nice thing with the waterfall model is it sets clear expectations on the schedule, the budget, and the resourcing needs. So since you're able to plan out the full project, because you know all the phases you're going to go through, and you know you're only going to go through them once, you can really set clear expectations, set a great project plan to do so. The second thing is you get extensive documentation, which really helps ensure quality, reliability, and maintainability within that system. So you have documentation that can be utilized in that maintenance phase. So if somebody says, how does this work? They can go look at the documentation and have a good understanding of how that works and have a good understanding of why that's built the way it's built. In addition, in the waterfall model, you can easily measure progress. So it's very easy to know, are we in the requirements phase? Are we in the testing phase? Are we in the deployment phase? You can really easily see that you've kind of worked through and how far you're into the project. So you can really measure the progress very easily. So now looking at some of the cons to the waterfall model. One of the biggest cons, and I think this is the reason that other methodologies were spun off of this, is it's very inflexible. It's very rigid. You have your phases, you have your stages, and you're going to work through them one by one by one. You can't go back up, and you're going to work all the way through one time from the top to the bottom of that waterfall. So it's very cumbersome to work through with it being so rigid and inflexible. It doesn't help to meet business needs. The other thing is there's a long pull from that project start to something being tangible for the business. You kick off that project and you start understanding the business need and working through requirements all the way through the design, all the way through the development, and now finally in testing, the business gets to see what's been built. And they may have got little keys all along or clues or maybe been pulled into a demo, but they don't really get to get their hands on it. They don't get to see something and utilize something tangible. And they still don't even get to realize any of the benefits of it, right? They've put in all this time and effort and they're still testing it. It's not until deployment that they really can realize some of the benefits of the project. So there's a long time from that project kickoff until the business actually gets to realize the benefits of that particular software that's been built. In addition, because the business users aren't really seeing that product until the testing phase, a lot of problems aren't identified until then. So as you work through the requirements, the business, you may have been the best business analyst ever. You may have asked all the right questions, but there are certain things that you may have missed or that didn't come out in the requirements, or God forbid that the requirements have changed now. The business needs have changed because of that long pull from start until the testing. And so in the testing phase, you start hearing a lot about, oh, well, we needed to have it do this, or where's this feature functionality? And you start to realize some of those problems, and you can't really go back up to the requirements phase very easily, so it poses some issues there. Another con is the written documentation. It's great up front, right? It's awesome to have this detailed document, but the worst part is it's never kept up to date. Once you get into the maintenance mode, and quite frankly, even in deployment when you're making the last second changes, the bug fixes and different maybe little tweaks or enhancements in that deployment phase, they're not getting documented in the document. Maintaining that document becomes trying to make that kind of a living document, a living, breathing document with up-to-date information and continually up-to-date or updated to understand what's that software built and all the features that are in there. It's a losing battle, and very rarely can companies find a good way to keep it up to date. So over time, that document gets behind and it's no longer up to date, and it starts losing its usefulness because nobody can trust that that document houses the information they're looking for. The one other thing is this model promotes a gap between the business users and the development team. So since the business users are working through the requirements, and then the development team is working through the design and the implementation, there's kind of a rift, right? So the business users, hey, we give you everything that we need, right? We gave you all the requirements on such and such a date. Why is it taking you so long to get this done? And it kind of pits an us versus them mentality with the waterfall model. So businesses and companies have to be really careful when they have this model to ensure that the wall doesn't get put up between the business and the IT team. So those are some of the pros and the cons to the waterfall model. So the next thing is we're going to dive into is when to use it, right? There's got to be good times to use a waterfall model. And here are the key concepts for when to use the waterfall model. The first thing is you have clear objectives and a clear solution. So maybe this is something that you understand where you need to get to, and you understand the solution you need to build. So the waterfall model is great. There's not going to be a lot of surprises. You can work from top to bottom, and it'll be wonderful for you. Another reason could be that it's a large, complicated, and expensive project. So you want to make sure that you're working through and gathering all these requirements so you can architect and design the solution to meet all those needs. And there's a lot of complex things that are going on, so you need to be able to tackle those in kind of set design meetings and work through the development. And another piece is it's an expensive project, which the waterfall model is fairly expensive to utilize because of kind of the some of the rigidness to it. So, that's the other piece. The next thing is you want to use this when there's not really high pressure for an immediate return on investment on an implementation. Me personally, I've worked in this field as business analysis for quite a few years now, and I don't think I've ever had a business say, you know what, take as much time as you need. We don't need any immediate return on our time and going through and building these requirements. So yeah, that's a great time when to use the waterfall model, but realistically, there's very little time that there's no pressure at all on getting a return on investment in the kind of time that's being invested by the business to create the solution, or to at least help define the needs and the requirements of the solution. Another good time to use it is when the project team is fully knowledgeable about the solution application. So again, this comes down to no surprises, right? They're able to work from top to bottom through the process and have very few surprises that are coming up. Maybe they've worked in this particular solution or application many times before, such as in the consulting company that I currently work for, we configure and customize customer relationship management software. So both Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics. So we utilize their kind of starting platform, and then we're configuring and customizing that particular platform for our customers. We use that waterfall model. One reason is because we understand the solution, we understand that product, and we understand what can and can't be done. So having us kind of work through what are their requirements and their needs, we can then work fairly quickly through that waterfall model and have very little risk that we'd have to go up to a previous phase. Another good time to use this is when the requirements aren't going to really be changing. So a lot of this comes down to no surprises. Because there's no good way to go up to a previous stage or phase, when the requirements are going to be stable, you can utilize this. If this is an unknown, or the business isn't very tech savvy, or maybe you don't do a lot of projects as a project team and things are going to be missed or overlooked, this might not be the best model for you. And the next thing is resource constraints. The waterfall model does a great job to really segment out when people need to be engaged. At the beginning, the business analyst is working with the business to define their needs and define their requirements. Then the business analyst is working with the design team, whether it's developers or user interface analysts or whatever, to design that solution and make sure that meets the needs. So now the business is kind of disengaged, and the business only has to approve that final design. After the design and you move through the development, now you only need the business analyst kind of on the outside helping answer questions, but you have the development team engaged. So again, the business is kind of off doing their own thing. You have anybody that isn't actually writing the code for the particular piece in the deployment, kind of off doing their own thing, maybe working other projects. So when you have resource constraints and you don't have people available all the time for months and months for a project, this is a good way to kind of segment that out. And another big reason to use the waterfall model is when you need strict requirements for formal approval steps. So you need to have a requirements approval, you need to have a design approval, you need to have testing approval. When you have to have those certain milestones and there's those certain stage gates throughout the project, the waterfall is very useful. And again, that's the number 2 reason that my consulting company, or the consulting company I work for, utilizes that. Because we're writing the requirements, we need to go back to the customer and validate that this meets the needs. So I hope that helps explain the waterfall model and gives you a lot of detail and a lot of information about kind of the pros and the cons to it. Even though it's the oldest model out there and the oldest life cycle SDLC, it still is utilized today and it still has a place. So definitely need to be comfortable and at least understand the concepts of the waterfall model as you're getting into the business analyst world.